This episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast is presented by our new Sports Spectrum Increase 52-week devotional, inspiring stories of faith from the world of pro sports. If you're looking for a devotional to go through with yourself, maybe to go through with friends, family, maybe you have a child who loves sports and you want to go deep with them in their spiritual journey, well, I want to encourage you to pick up the 52-week devotional, the Increase 52-week devotional. It's available at Amazon and at theincrease.com. That's a great place to go, theincrease.com, and pick up your copy of the Increase 52-week devotional. Athletes from the world of professional sports, people like Justin Simmons of the Denver Broncos, James McCann of the New York Mets, Matt Hasselbeck, the longtime NFL quarterback, Dan Orlovsky, the ESPN NFL analyst, Semi Ojeleye, who's with the Milwaukee Bucks in the NBA. Athletes like those are featured in a devotional form once a week. You can go through it with your friends or yourself. It'll encourage you in your faith. It makes the perfect gift. Again, it's on Amazon, or you can get it at theincrease.com, our 52-week Increase devotional.
This is Sports Spectrum, the intersection of sports and faith, where we bring Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
Hey guys, welcome to the show. I am Jason, and this is the Sports Spectrum podcast. We are the intersection of sports and faith, bringing Jesus and keeping Jesus in the sports conversation. My email address, jason@sportsspectrum.com. Love to hear from you. If you have a guest idea, a show topic, or just some feedback on today's show, you can email me, jason@sportsspectrum.com. And then, of course, you can check out our website with all the free content right there. Devotionals, podcasts, articles, stories, testimonials, all for free at sportsspectrum.com. Now, today on the show, Jamy Bechler is our guest, and Jamy wears a lot of hats. He's an author, a leadership consultant. He's a podcast host. He's a coach, if you will, a leadership coach, not just a consultant. He's a speaker, a public speaker, and speaks to a lot of different organizations and teams, particularly in the sports space. He has a great Toronto Raptors speaking story that he shares here, where he got a little nervous, and I thought that was a really fun story that Jamy shared. But Jamy's got some really cool, credits to himself, right? He's got a bunch of books that he's written, including The Bus Trip, which I really enjoyed. And his latest book is The Captain, which released back in November of 2021, sort of a modern day leadership fable that I love leadership fables. John Gordon has written a bunch of those. Todd Gongwar has written one that I really love. And now Jamy Bechler has a couple that I'm really enjoying and reading as well. So check out The Captain. That's his new book. We'll talk about that. But Jamy was a coach. He was an athletic director, and he left all that to kind of take a leap of faith and go into this calling that he felt God had placed on him to go into the leadership consultant speaking space. And now God's doing amazing things in his life 5 years later. He is a certified John Maxwell leadership speaker. He's a great author, and he's got a lot of good nuggets here on today's show. Let's take a listen to Jamy Bechler on Sports Spectrum. What's up, Jamy? Welcome to Sports Spectrum, buddy.
Hey, Jason. I'm excited to be talking with you. You were on my podcast a few years ago, and that was exciting when you wrote your first book. So that was cool. And actually, this you will not believe this, and I have not told you this until now, but This is actually a bucket list day for me. Being on the Sports Spectrum podcast. There's a couple radio shows or podcasts I've always wanted to be on, and I used to drive in my car on Saturday mornings listening to Sports Spectrum Radio.
Chuck Swirsky.
Chuck Swirsky.
Yeah.
And I subscribed to Sports Spectrum magazine. So this played a key part in me growing up in high school and college. And so I've always wanted to be not necessarily interviewed by Jason Romano, but
somebody else.
But you know what? You're not bad. You're not too shabby. But Sports Spectrum podcast, Sports Spectrum Radio means a lot to me.
That's awesome. I didn't know that at all. And it's funny, you never actually reached out and said, hey, I want to be on Sports Spectrum. You had that humility about yourself because there's been many people that have reached out and pitched themselves as guests, which I don't mind, but you didn't do that. I just am following you, and you and I knowing each other and kind of being social media friends. I've been wanting to have you on and find the right time, and here's the right time. So I'm glad we were able to do it. And you have a new book out that we're going to talk about, The Captain, in a little bit. But let's dive into your journey some, because your story is really fascinating to me, and how you've kind of grown this author leadership consultant business that you've been doing the last few years. But before that, you were a high school athletic director, a college head coach, and now you're wearing all of these other hats, right? This podcast host, speaker, leadership consultant, author. So help me through the sort of hats that you wore before you're wearing the hats that you're wearing now, and kind of sports playing a huge role, obviously, in your life and going into coaching.
Well, I work with professional teams now, college teams, high school teams, athletic departments. And I had a coach about a year ago, a Division I basketball coach, say, hey, the reason I hired you over some of these other people that are in your space, maybe even some people that, well, certainly people that are more well-known, is that you've done it all. You understand where we're at. And I never really thought about that. But as you talk about the journey, I've won Coach of the Year honors. I've also been fired.
Right.
I've traveled in style and had big budgets. I've also driven 15 passenger vans after a loss, where you're putting together sandwiches from the lunch meat that the cafeteria gave you that day.
Yeah.
I've kind of experienced a lot of things, ups and downs, which I think helps me now. And so you ask about the journey. I started off as a basketball coach. I played some sports in college. I actually lettered in 3 sports in college, which means there's 2 types of people that letter in multiple sports in college. There's the Deion Sanders, Bo Jacksons, and then there's the people that are really not very good, but the coaches allow them to play other sports so that they can fill out rosters. And
your resume had college football and college basketball at Hiram. Is it Hiram College in Ohio?
Hiram College, yes.
So
and I also ran track.
I was like, oh, he played college basketball and college football. But you're saying it wasn't Bo Jackson or Deion Sanders.
It was not prime time. No, in fact, okay. So I went to play college basketball, and I thought I was a heavily recruited athlete. This is back in the early 90s. And I thought that I was a recruited athlete, and I was. The coach did a great job of recruiting me. I chose that school. First week I'm on campus, there's these signs all around campus saying, hey, football teams had injuries, illnesses. If you want to come try out for the football team, we'd love to have you. Something like that. And I'm like, it's God speaking to me. I can play football here. Awesome. And so I go into my head coach and I say, Coach, the football team needs me. The football team needs me. I said, would it be all right if I played football in the fall and then I joined the basketball team in the winter? And that meeting lasted about 30 seconds. And I was too young and naive to know what that meant. Later on, when I got into coaching, I completely understood it. He was like, oh, Jamy, I think that would be a great idea. I think that you should go and play football. That would be an awesome idea for you to do. Little did I know that comment and that quick meeting really meant that I was not such a recruited athlete after all, because no self-respecting coach who wanted me on their team would let me go play football before playing basketball. But I played both sports for that first year.
Yeah.
I actually made the basketball team. There were 22 freshmen that he recruited that year. I was one of 22 and he cut 11 of them. So I actually made the team. I was one of the 11 out of 22 that made the team on basketball. Then the next year I just played football, and then I hurt my knee and I decided I didn't want to go through that anymore. And so then I ran track, and in keeping with who I was in track, I did pretty much everything. I was decent at everything, but not good enough at any one thing. So I was the slowest person on every relay team. Mm-hmm. The 4x100.
Yes.
I was the dude that ran 80 yards. The guy ahead of me ran 110. The guy after me ran 110.
That's right.
So that was just good coaching.
So you wanted to go into coaching basically after you finished college. Is that something that you started to think about? Well, maybe if I can't play professionally, I could coach and go into coaching and help some people that way.
Yeah. And so I really learned early on that I was going to be a coach, because I definitely was told early on I would not be a professional athlete.
Right.
So I got into coaching. John Wooden was a huge influence on my life. As far as coaching goes, I wanted to be kind of like John Wooden. I wanted to be a coach that cared about his players, whether they were playing or not. And so I went to Kent State University to be a graduate assistant on the men's side with Gary Waters. It was his first year as a coach there.
Yeah.
And, then I spent a couple of years at Anderson University in Indiana. And then I decided, or I felt like I was ready to be a head coach, which is, naive, because just like being married, you're never actually ready. You just might be more prepared than someone else, or you might be more prepared than you were the year before, but you're never ready to be a head coach, never ready to be a husband. But I ended up switching over and being a women's coach in Texas. And so for the rest of my career, I was a women's college coach and was a head coach at LeTourneau University in Texas. I was a head coach at Tennessee Temple. I was a head coach at Bryan College and Martin Methodist College. Those were in Tennessee. And then I had an opportunity to go be a high school athletic director in Indiana at a large athletic program. Nobody won more boys basketball state titles than the school I went to. So you think of Indiana basketball, that's a big deal. And so fifth largest gym in the world for high school, seated over 7,000. So that felt like it was speaking my name as a basketball coach.
7,000 kids at a basketball game for a high school game.
Crazy wow. Big, kind of like Texas with football.
Mm-hmm.
But we, seated over 7,000 people. And then after a couple of years of being there, we did some fun things. We turned the program around a little bit, got their budget going, got some student athlete stuff going. And then I decided to jump 2 feet into the deep end and go out on my own as an entrepreneur, which essentially means you're either self-employed or unemployed, depending on the day. So went out and wanted to try to help as many people, as many kids be better leaders and better members of their community one day, and to help coaches be better as coaches and be better as leaders. So we write some books, we do a podcast, we help out as many people as we can.
There's a lot there. And I think the one I relate to the most is that transition of going out. Now, I didn't go out on my own. I came to Sports Spectrum from ESPN. And at the time, it felt like I was kind of going out on my own because I was working from home and it was a different lifestyle that I had to adapt to, but it's still a leap of faith, a transition that you have to take. Can you kind of take me through that? Because a lot of people probably were looking at you and saying, man, you're successful here. Why wouldn't you keep doing what you're doing? But you made that leap, and maybe how the role that your faith played in that leap.
Well, I'd always been somebody that was, had a passion for leadership, even as a young kid. Now I wasn't any more advanced than any other kid. I was still a teenage punk when I was in high school. And when I was in college, I might've been a captain of my track team, but I still missed the bus one day, and I still thought that I still went through the same thing college kids go through, but I always had a passion for wanting to learn more. I can remember working out on a stationary bike in college and reading Bobby Bowden's books and reading John Maxwell's books. So I was reading a lot, but I always throughout my career had a passion for leadership. And so when I was an athletic director, I had this opportunity. It had actually come across my desk, or this opportunity appeared a few years previously, but it was to join the John Maxwell team, to become a certified John Maxwell leadership coach. And at the time I was like, well, I don't really have the money and I don't have the time to do this. And the kind of the recruiter was like, well, you're really never going to have the time to do anything. You just have to choose to do it. And as for money, it's not that expensive. And so when I was an athletic director, this opportunity popped up again. And I was like, you know what? I'm never going to have the time, but I do have a little extra money. Let's go through this program. Let it help me become a better leader to then, it's a passion of mine, but maybe I can learn some strategies to help these student athletes that we're dealing with, to help these coaches that we're working with. And as I got into that, that was really the first time after all these years, it was the first time that I realized maybe you can make a business out of this. Maybe you could make a living out of this. Because to me, the only people making a living at speaking or leadership consulting was like a Tony Robbins,
right?
Or a former great coach, a Bobby Bowden, type, people like that had a big name. I never thought that, someone like me, who was a nobody, could actually have a speaking career or actually be consultant. And so that was the first time I realized that. And so I started looking at that line of work more and more, or that calling, so to speak. And I realized, you know what? I love what I'm doing in organized athletics, but I might be able to share what I've learned and my experiences and help coach more coaches and help lead other leaders and help them develop more so that then they can help their student athletes develop more. And if I can have a bigger platform, not necessarily from a, I'm this famous person with a platform, but if I could just get out there and maybe be able to touch more lives, that would be pretty fulfilling to me. And so far it's been that way. I've been doing this for 5 years, and it's been great. A lot of learning curve, certainly, like anything is, but it's been great to be able to meet and work with so many great leaders and coaches out there who have a passion for kids.
Yeah, you said 5 years. That's kind of how long it's been for me too, with this new role, which is interesting. Kind of the parallels there. Tell me about your faith and how that guides you and how that helps you in the role that you have. Because you mentioned these names. You mentioned John Wooden. You mentioned John Maxwell. You mentioned Bobby Bowden. There's a bunch of others that you mentioned. They're all people of faith. So I'm guessing, and you mentioned right at the top about the importance of Sports Spectrum, for you in listening to the radio show back in the day. So I have to imagine your faith is hugely important to you.
Yeah, I have a very boring faith story. I don't have the, I found Jesus when I was 6 years old. He didn't, unfortunately, he didn't take me out of a life of crime and drugs at that point.
Right.
I hadn't developed that yet, but, I became a Christian when I was 6 years old. It was actually a Bible release class at school. Like for an hour, once a week, we got to go to this local church and learn about God, and which is absolutely crazy to think about now. Yeah. But I did that, and that's where I accepted Jesus. And just through the years, I grew closer and closer. I was camp counselor at a Christian camp during college. It was the same one I went to as a high school student. And I always thought, all right, I want to do something to give back. I want to be in ministry, but I don't want to dig wells. I don't want to translate Bibles. I don't want to go to Africa. I don't want to be a pastor. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I can be in the ministry from a basketball standpoint. Yeah. Maybe I can do God's work, so to speak. Maybe I can impact lives and be an example of Christ and show Christ to people as a basketball coach, since that's what I want to do anyways. And so I feel like we were able to do that a lot. Now, certainly I was imperfect as a coach without a shadow of a doubt, especially in my first head coaching experience. I'm 27 years old. I think I know everything. I've done everything to deserve that job, to earn that job. I think that, I'm the cat's meow. I'm a 27-year-old NCAA head coach. Yeah. Well, even though I cared about my players, they didn't necessarily know I cared about them. And still, at the end of the day, we were trying to be a Christian program, but it was almost more so that I looked like I was this good leader, that I looked like I was the Christian coach, the Bobby Bowden, the John Wooden, whatever, that I looked this way. I did care about them, but I also cared about my ego, and I cared about looking good as a young coach. And so it took getting resigned after 4 years. And for the coaches out there, they absolutely know what getting resigned means. I technically didn't get fired, but they were going to allow me to take my talents elsewhere.
Right.
And that really woke me up. And actually at that time, I had gotten to know a gentleman in the coaching business named Ed Schilling. At the time, he had recently gotten fired at Wright State as the head coach, but he was at Memphis with John Calipari. He coached with the New Jersey Nets with John Calipari, but Ed Schilling, he was the first phone call I made when I got fired, because I know that he had gone through that just a year previous. And he actually sent me this book, and I forget the exact title, but it was something like They Meant It for Evil, God Meant It for Good, or something like that. It was about Joseph's story of all the stuff that happened in Joseph's life and how, he was able to overcome all these challenges and the stuff that people were either out to get him or just things that seemed like wasn't fair. And he still overcame that stuff. And so Ed Schilling sent me this book, and I read it and realized, I can be bitter or I can be better about this. And I was like, you know what? I don't think I deserve to be fired, but I certainly wasn't doing what I needed to do. Like as a Christian, as a leader, I wasn't doing what I needed to be doing, and I need to change, and I need to become better from this. And actually, since that situation, I bought, through the years, I bought a lot of that book, and I've sent it out to a lot of coaches that have been fired, and to try to also maybe pay it forward and do what Ed Schilling did for me. But through the years, yeah, the relying on my faith, certainly, because in coaching, as well as anything in life, it's tough. It's tough. Yeah. And in coaching, you're going to go through ups and downs. You're dealing with people. You're dealing with trying to, get man's approval, because you do have to win. You have to be approved by your athletic director or by the fans, or else you lose your job. And yeah, you might lose your job, but I was never, or yeah, you might be okay, or you might have a contract, but I was never at the level where if I got fired, I was going to be still set. I was a small college coach, and a lot of times if you get fired from small college, you end up selling real estate or insurance, or you end up going into a different profession. There's not a lot of landing spots sometimes. And so you do seek out, hey, how can I be the best coach I can be so I don't get fired, so that my family can be provided for? Because my kid is weird and my wife is weird. They like to live indoors and they like to wear shoes and they like to eat food, and that stuff costs money. And so
those weirdos,
it's crazy. My son, he wants to eat SpaghettiOs and not just, pasta rings, rings and pasta sauce or whatever, and he wants to wear Nikes right now. He's mad because at Christmas time, he didn't get these $3,000 Jeremy Scott shoes that he wanted, and it's like, the shoes might be made of money, but we're not, so kids and family, they have expensive tastes. And so as a coach, you do have that pressure, you do have that pressure of, I want to keep my job for that, or, you have the ego involved. And so, yeah, definitely without a faith, I don't know how people do it, to be honest. I don't know how they can really impact lives, have a positive influence on others, and still have a balance or a perspective without faith. Because to me, then all they're doing is chasing after their tail all the time.
Right. And it becomes about yourself. We go by the moniker John 3:30 at our ministry with Sports Spectrum, the increase, right? He must increase, I must decrease. And it's John the Baptist talking about how he needs to decrease himself and increase in Christ. And that's what we try to look at. And I don't know either how you do it without faith, because without faith, the increase of self is really where it all becomes prominent. Like, it's always about yourself. It's always about yourself. And I think that's a real leadership principle that both of us have written about and talked about, is the idea of serving. And that has to come into play. I have to imagine for you, as you're consulting and talking to coaches and others, that's got to be the core message in some cases.
I think it does. And Pat Williams, who we both know, great writer, great leader through the years, but he wrote a book years ago. He writes like 7 a year, it seems like.
It seems like it, right? The guy's got like 120 books or something, Jamie.
Yeah. You've heard of Book of the Month Club. I think that's really like, he has a Book of the Month Club, like not that he reads, but that he writes. But he wrote a book called Paradox of Power. And it really is a paradox sometimes, because to have the most power and to make the most impact, we would think that we have to jump up on this platform, or we have to have the loudest voice, or we have to be in charge. But Jesus wasn't like that necessarily. There's this paradox of power, that if the people with the best leaders, the servant leaders, they're going to be powerful, and they're going to display their power by also being servants. And obviously Pat Williams said it much better in his book than I'm saying it right now, but that paradox of power. And that's where I say, if you're not a Christian and you don't have that faith, I don't know how you can go about serving the people that are around you, because you don't have that example. There's not those examples out there of, all right, this is a great leader who is also very unselfish, but they don't have Christ in their life. They don't have that example. Jesus Christ was the perfect model of servant leadership. And as leaders, I think one of the biggest things we do as leaders that's a mistake is that we make it all about us, or our power, or I'm in charge, or just do what I'm telling you to do. Jason, if you just do what I tell you to do, I know what I'm talking about. Everything will be good. And so we want compliant followers as opposed to developing other leaders. Instead of empowering others, we just want followers, compliant followers. And that's just because we're trying to exert our power. We're trying to exert our status, or we're trying to, compensate for something, or get our egos in the way, or whatever that is. And so, I don't know without Jesus's example, I don't know how we can serve others. And that's what the best leaders do, is they serve others.
Yeah. Jamy Bechler is our guest here on Sports Spectrum. You have this new book now. By the way, I did want to ask you, let me get into the book in a second, because it's one thing to go and feel a call to kind of go speak a little bit and coach, but you're podcasting, you're writing books. I mean, you're wearing a ton of hats here, and I think they kind of all intersect and are woven together, right? It's all about coaching. You're coaching leaders by the books that you write, by the podcast that you do, by the speaking engagements and the opportunities to share with others. So they kind of all intersect. But when you left in 2016 to go and pursue this, did you envision it would be all of these sort of things that you'd be doing? Because I certainly know I didn't when I left. I thought it would be a podcast with Sports Spectrum and maybe that's it. And suddenly it turned into 4, 5, 6 different things.
When I left to be a speaker. And,
right.
Most people are scared to death to be a speaker, and Jerry Seinfeld in his comedy bit will say, the number one fear of people is fear of public speaking, which then means they would rather at a funeral be the one in the casket than the one giving the eulogy. Right. People are scared to be a public speaker. I'm not. I've been nervous one time in my life as a public speaker. And that was actually the first time I spoke to the Toronto Raptors. And I was supposed to speak to them at a mini camp after dinner. They were out in Beverly Hills for mini camp, and I was supposed to speak to them after dinner for 45 minutes. Coach Casey comes up to me before dinner and he goes, "Jamy, I'm really sorry to do this, but DeMar has to get back to Toronto. I didn't know that. He has to go back. There's a Drake concert and he's doing something with Drake. So he has to leave right now. Could you talk to him right now, but only for 15 minutes instead of 45? Oof. And as soon as you're done, then they're going to eat." And, so there's like these $100 steaks just outside the doors that they can see. And I'm the person standing between them and their steaks. And they've never met me. I know the coaching staff, but the players don't know me. And I'm like, all right, I got to go from 45 minutes to 15. And instead of after dinner, it's right now. That's the only time I've ever been nervous in my life. The very first time I ever got paid for speaking, I wasn't nervous, but this is a little known fact. I was a guest preacher at an all African-American church.
Wow.
And I was the pastor on a Sunday morning at an African-American church. That was the first time I ever got paid for speaking. Did not know I was going to get paid. It wasn't a lot, but it was a little goodwill offering type.
For those listening that don't know what you look like, by the way, you are a white dude from middle-aged white dude from Indiana, right?
That's right.
Coached in Indiana.
That's right. So I was not exactly what you would look like standing up in an African-American church. But anyways, I went off on a tangent there, but yeah, I wanted to speak. That's what I thought I wanted to do when I left organized athletics. I always wanted to write books, but I never thought that I was good enough to write a book, especially according to my English teachers. Never was something that I thought I would be able to do. And the podcasting thing was never on my radar either. And so it was speaking. And now at this point, I would almost prefer not to go out speaking, the traveling and,
sure.
That's it. It can wear on you. So I like writing. I'm not sure I'm as talented as some people. The John Gordons, the John Maxwells, Pat Williams, the Jason Romanos of this world. Not sure I'm as talented, but it's fun to write. And, as you look at the stuff that I do, it's really twofold. I do it because I'm speaking to myself. So when I write something or I put something out there in the podcast, almost always I'm writing to myself as well. It's something that I'm trying to remind myself of. Now, I don't remind myself as well as my wife does. My wife will be like, "Hey, you really should listen to what you just said, or you really should reread what you just wrote because you're not doing that very well."
Yeah, but our wives are good like that.
Oh man, great reminders.
Yes.
But then the second part, and this sounds really like kumbaya-ish, but I really do. When I see on social media people at each other's throats, and when I see the crime rates going crazy, and when I see people making boneheaded decisions in sports or choices in life, I'm like, if I can have just a little part in helping one person be a little bit different, because then that's exciting. But here's the thing, all these coaches listening to this, the people that you're working with right now, that 16-year-old or that 21-year-old in college, they're going to be a husband, a wife, a mother, a father. They're going to be a business person, an educator, a leader in their community. So our communities 10 or 15 years from now will either be good or bad based upon what we're doing now with these kids.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds so deep and kumbaya-ish and Mother Teresa like, but really it's not just about the X's and O's and winning, even though we do get wrapped up in that. And I understand we want to be excellent at that. But if I can have a part in helping a coach their kids a little bit better, and it's not all about the X's and O's, and one day little Jimmy or little Joey on that team ends up being big Jimmy and big Joey who's making a difference in their community, then great.
And then you had honestly, I think that's Colossians 3, and you're honoring God in the way you're doing that too, because your mindset is pointing to the North Star of Christ. It's not just doing this to make yourself feel good. Although that's nice. It does feel good. I've had those moments too, but it's really about something bigger and something better. Speaking of better, you wrote this new book, which I want to talk about, The Captain. And I'm such a fan of leadership fables. Now, I haven't read fully The Captain yet, Jamy. I plan on reading it because I've read your other books. But Todd Gongware's Lead for God's Sake was one of the first books I ever read that was sort of this leadership fable. This is going back maybe 12 years ago. And that book got me interested in learning more about leadership. It got me to a point where I could put my faith in action and see what he meant by leading for God's sake and how Jesus is the example with the janitor in his book. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And then I read John Gordon's The Carpenter and many of other books that John has written that are leadership sort of fables, which are fantastic. And now you got this one. And I like The Bus Trip too, which was the other book that you read. I really enjoyed reading that one. But now you have The Captain. So let's talk about The Captain.
Yeah, well, just like you, I was influenced by those gentlemen. I mean, Todd Gongware essentially did a mic drop. That's the only book he's written. I'm not sure he'll ever write another one.
I asked him on this show, I said, are you going to write another book? This was so good. It was so influential on me. He's like, I don't know, Jason. I don't know. And I was like, okay. Sometimes you just make your masterpiece and that's it. You just leave it, let it impact people forever. So
absolutely. But the John Gordon books, I love reading those books. And even a Patrick Lencioni, he writes some great fables, more so in the business area. But, even Tony Dungy wrote one a couple of years ago. So I love reading these books. And so I wanted to try my hand at it. Certainly, I'm not at that level, but there have been, a couple people that aren't related to me that have enjoyed the books and they've found that it's been helpful for their teams. And so I appreciate that.
I like that you said that aren't related to me. Isn't that funny?
Yeah, I was really excited the first time I got a sale. And then I looked at the shipping address and it was my mom. That was a little disappointing, but
they're our biggest cheerleaders, right?
I'll take that. But, we wrote 2 nonfiction books to start with. And then now we've written 2 fictional books. The Bus Trip, that was a book that I wanted to write for a long time to really put in the hands of student athletes about how they can conversate with each other, how they can hold each other accountable, how they can lead and be good teammates from within, with whether the coach is good or not. Mm-hmm. And I actually got some criticism from some people because they were like, well, it's not, we don't like it because the coach isn't this or isn't that. And I said, yeah, I purposely made the coach almost neutral. Like the coach isn't good. The coach isn't bad. The coach cares. The coach makes some mistakes, but it's not about the coach. It's about these athletes understanding that they can make a difference on their team in a small way. And so that book was about everybody can be a leader on the team because everybody can influence. Even if your best friend on the team, if you're at the bench, at the end of the bench and your best friend is a water cooler and the athletic trainer, okay, you can still make a difference on your team. Everybody can make a difference. This next book, The Captain, that is our most recent one that came out, is more about positional leadership. Because what we see a lot is this misnomer out there that if you have a position or you have status or you have talent, then you're a leader. And if you don't have that stuff, you're not a leader. And number one, I don't think that's true. And we address some of that in the bus trip of, if you don't have a position, you can still be an influencer, a person of influence. But in this book, The Captain, we want it to hit head on kind of people that are in positions. So yes, it's written for student athletes, but it can talk to the coach. I actually just had a coach email me yesterday saying, I gave this out to my kids, but as I'm reading it, I got convicted myself that I need to do a better job as a leader. And that's what we wanted. We wanted a bank manager. We wanted a CEO of a factory or whatever, or of a company, to be able to read this and say, I need to do a better job. I need to be a real leader. And it's not just because I have this business card, or I make this much money, or I have this kind of a status. And so, yeah, The Captain is about a star quarterback turned hotshot fighter pilot who he has a training mission failure or an accident. And that starts this chain reaction of different things where he starts having flashbacks, or he starts thinking about things, and he realizes he might have always been the star. He might have always been a captain, but he never was actually a good leader. He never was actually someone that inspired others. And so, hopefully people will take out of this is not about your position. It's not about status. It's not about titles. It's about, are you making people around you better? Are you inspiring people? And hopefully people will take that from the book. But it was really fun. I got to know one of the former commanding officer at Top Gun. Did a lot of research with him. Went out and spent some time with him. So that was fun.
Nice.
Because obviously the book is not going to be perfect in every aspect, but we wanted it to be as close to realistic as possible, both from the sports standpoint, but also from the naval aviator standpoint, the Top Gun standpoint.
Yeah. I think Top Gun 2, by the way, is coming out next year. I mean, it was supposed to come out for like the last 3 years. So it's good timing. You said Top Gun. I'm like, oh yeah, I think the sequel is supposed to come out eventually once they decide to release it. I think it's 2022 this year that it's going to be released. So I'm excited for your book, man. The Captain is available everywhere books are found, right? What's the best place that they can get it?
Probably Amazon is the best place.
Amazon. Yeah. And what is your website? I want to direct people to that and check all that out too.
Yeah. thecaptainbook.com is where they can get autograph copies or team discounts.
Okay.
So if you want to get it for your whole team, you can go to Amazon and spend more money, or you can just go to the Captain Book and they'll all be signed and it's cheaper.
Nice.
And I don't make any more money. It's just, you save money. It's just a way of making it easier. So instead of getting $15.99 books on Amazon and getting a bunch of them, you get cheaper books from me.
Thecaptainbook.com. That's cool. I'll definitely send people there. And I hear you on the team thing, because when I wrote my leadership book, I wanted to write it with the idea that people were going through it together as a team. And I'm guessing, because I've read your books, that's kind of what you're thinking too. Yes, it's great for you to read it for yourself, but to go through it with the team, there's something special and unique in a bond when everybody's kind of reading the same thing. Yeah.
And when I was a coach, and I'm leading team book studies for John Maxwell and John Gordon. Now, I'll be honest, and just between you and me, nobody else. But
nobody else listening.
I'm not sure I ever bought any of the John Maxwell books. I found some really cool PDFs that went over the chapters. So my teams would read. It wasn't really a book study. It was chapter studies.
Okay.
But hey, they still got a lot. I don't think John Maxwell was hurting because of that.
I think he's okay. He's done well for himself. Yeah.
He's doing all right. I'm proud of where he's ended up.
By the way, speaking of bucket lists, he's one of those guys. Probably I have a list of about 5 or 6 people that I want to have on this show. And I've tried for years and it just hasn't worked out. But he's a guy that I want to talk to someday. So when that happens, I'll let everybody know. But John Maxwell's a guy I've been watching for years and reading for years too. So,
well, you had a while ago, you had Ruth or Billy Graham's daughter, or Billy Graham's granddaughter,
Rachel Ruth Lott's right. She had 4 names. I told her, I said, that's a lot, Rachel. But we had Billy Graham's granddaughter on. That was pretty neat. I had his grandson on last year too, maybe it was 2 years ago in 2020. So it was fascinating to talk to them.
Yeah. He would be, sometimes you have these questions of, if you could eat dinner with, 3 people from history or those kind of questions you'll get sometimes. And Billy Graham is always on my Mount Rushmore of people I would love to have sat down with. And I had the honor of being able to work as a counselor at a crusade back in maybe 1993 or 94 when I
Oh,
was
wow. Did you get a
in
chance to meet
Cleveland
him?
when I was in college. No,
Uh,
no. And so that was something that was disappointing. I didn't get to meet him, but I got to serve, as a counselor at that Cleveland crusade. And it was just amazing, the training, the organization going through that. But his organization is so amazing, in the integrity of that organization, and how he was really down to earth.
mm-hmm.
I didn't meet him, but when he would speak to the whole group or what, just so down to earth. And it was, he would definitely be right up there with people I would like to meet.
Well, and the legacy. I mean, when I'm talking to his granddaughter who's in ministry and helping people and who's a coach's wife and, writing books and speaking and sharing and thinking about his great granddaughter, who are going to be going out and doing whatever they do and making it. It's just this real legacy that you can kind of see the lineage that started with Billy Graham. It's a really neat thing. It gets me excited about the future for my family. And I know we have one other thing in common, that we both have one child. And, I tell people, Jamy, do you get this, that we're not really parents when you only have one child? That's what I get told a lot, because my brothers both have multiple kids. One has 4, the other has 5. And I'm like, yeah, I just got one, but I love her to death, but I just got one. So tell me really quick your adoption story with Jalen. I know that's your son. Tell me about
Jalen. Talking about the parenting thing, but I can't figure out what's happened. But 12 years ago, I was an absolutely amazing parent. I don't understand what happened, but 12 years ago, I think I was an all-star parent.
Right.
And now that I have a 12-year-old, I don't know, something's happened. I was a really smart parent.
Wait till they get teenagers, Jamy. It just changes everything about you.
Absolutely. But 12 years ago, we adopted Jalen. We were coaching down in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and we weren't able to have kids. And so we went through the adoption process, and my wife kept telling me, we're not going to be that story where, you get a call and the next day you have a kid, because that was what I was worried about. Yeah, we want a kid, but I don't want him, like one day we don't have a kid, the next day we do.
Right.
She was like, no, I promise that won't be us. And it wasn't us. It was 7 days, not one day. But I get this call.
I told you, when we make plans, God laughs, Jamy. That's how it works.
Comedian. He's a comedian. But we get this call. Hey, we've got this lady, a mother who saw your profile, wants to meet with you about having her, taking her kid and adopting her child.
Yeah.
And so we went there. She was really excited. She was like, and at the time it was 14 days. She was really excited. She was like, I just came from the doctor and he said he's going to induce labor a week early. And I'm on my fingers, I'm counting, and I'm like carrying the 1 and trying to do the math. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's the day of our first game. We can't do this. You got to go back to tell that doctor he can't induce labor. But then I'm like, no, I'm good, because then I said, all right, well, when are they going to induce labor? Oh, like 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, oh, perfect. Our game's at 6 o'clock. It'll be great. I'll be able to, spend a couple times with the kid, kid pops out, spend a couple hours with them, with mom, get to the game. Yeah. And every wife right now listening to this, or every mother, is just rolling her eyes. But,
correct. Yes.
The other thing about that adoption is she's African-American.
Mm.
She had literally, the night before she went through these profiles at the adoption agency, she had seen the movie Blind Side.
Yeah.
With about Michael Orr.
Yeah,
and
of course.
She thought to herself, it was amazing. So she watches that. And then the next day she's going through these profiles and she comes across ours and sees all this stuff about me being a coach. And she was like, you know what? That would be really cool if a white family who's in athletics adopts my son. And so if she hadn't saw The Blind Side the night before, we probably wouldn't have Jalen today.
Wow. What a great story. It's funny how the power of just a simple movie, which is a great movie, by the way, The Blind Side, could affect a person's ability to say, you know what, let's think a little differently here. And now look at you. You got a 12-year-old on your hands. And I hear it gets better in the teenage years with boys, because with girls, it was really hard when my daughter turned 13. She's now 17. So it's getting a little better and she's coming back around. So hopefully, it's a good experience. I'm sure it will be for you when you have those teenagers running around.
Yeah, I don't know. He's into gaming. He's not into sports. He's into gaming. And so
Okay.
I think I'm going to be a new kind of sports parent, esports parent.
Yeah.
I think I can see this happening here in another year or two. It's going to be like, no, Jalen, you are not going outside and playing with your friends until you get your third hour of Fortnite practice in. You stay in that basement until you get your gaming practice in. You're not going outside. Don't give me that. You're not getting a bike for Christmas.
Yeah.
You're going to get another gaming console.
That's so funny. No, that's cool though. I mean, listen, that's the day and age that we're living in. And you find their passions and you try to root with them hard on the passions that they have and kind of guide them in that. So, well, that's great. I love hearing your story, my friend. I mean, there's so many more things we could talk about, but we'll have to save it for the second conversation. I mean, your dad is a 30-year firefighter who owns 8 antique fire trucks, or owned them at one point. Your family raised Dalmatian dogs. There's so many things. Your dad built custom John Deere lawnmowers with custom fire trucks, getting more than 2 million views on Facebook. Like you sent me these tidbits.
What is that?
I don't know.
What is that? Like I do videos and stuff.
What's going on?
I do videos and stuff, and I get like 3 views on my stuff, and my dad has over 2 million hits on Facebook for his custom fire truck John Deere tractor. What is that all about? And I don't know what that. He didn't even have a Facebook account. Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, he's not even a social media guy. So
let's save those conversations for the next time, because those were fascinating tidbits. But listen, this was great. I'm glad we talked leadership. We talked about your story and becoming a dad. Just lots of good stuff here. I hope people were encouraged, Jamy. And congrats on the new book. Again, The Captain is the name of the book. TheCaptainBook.com is where you can get autographed copies and group discounts for your team, or you can get it on Amazon. That's a great place to get it as well. Thanks, Jamy Bechler. Appreciate you, buddy. Thanks for being here.
Appreciate it, Jason. Keep up the good work.
And super thankful to know Jamy Bechler, but to have him here joining us on Sports Spectrum. And I love that Sports Spectrum was on his bucket list as well. I thought that was kind of neat. And he's got a lot of humility, Jamy. He did not reach out to me and say, hey, could I get on your podcast and promote my book? Jamy didn't do that at all. In fact, I just follow him on Twitter, and I really like a lot of the things that he tweets. And you should definitely follow him as well. But I just reached out to him and said, let's do this, man. We've been following each other for a while on Twitter. Let's actually have a conversation. And I'm glad that we did that here on the show today. Again, thecaptainbook.com is the website. You can go check out and purchase Jamy's new book, The Captain. It's a great sort of modern day leadership fable that he talked about, released back in November of 2021. And I think it's a great book that you can go through with your team, or just to help you and encourage you in your leadership journey. Jamy Bechler, and the book again is called The Captain. We appreciate him for being here today on the show. Thank you as well for tuning in. Whatever app you're listening to this podcast on, do us a favor, click that subscribe or that follow button on the app so that you never miss an episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast. And we're just excited about 2022. We're almost at 5 years of this podcast, and we are so excited to see what God's going to do. And we hope you want to join us on this journey as well of sports and faith and bringing Jesus into the conversation. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you guys next time right here on Sports Spectrum. Have a great rest of your day and stay safe.